Yeah, Marlo Mike coming home. It's official. Should see him by 2027. Mike coming home.
Word started spreading that Marlo Mike might be coming home. And the second that hit certain circles, nobody was thinking celebration. There was one question on the table. What does Boosie Badazz do now? If you know the history, you know why Marlo Mike walking out of prison would send a chill through anyone tied to what happened in Baton Rouge. We're talking about a man at the center of one of the most explosive murder for HR cases this country has seen connected to a rap artist. Allegations so serious they carried the possibility of the death penalty. The man prosecutors said pulled the trigger. The man whose actions built the entire case, potentially walking back into the world. Want to know why Boosie supposedly panicked? Stick around, because by the time we're done, you'll understand why this has people who know the full story walking on eggshells. What's good, fam? Welcome back. Today, we're going all the way in on one of the most dangerous, complicated stories to come out of the Southern rap scene. This isn't beef. This isn't social media drama. This is murder allegations, courtrooms, and what happens when the streets follow you to the top of the music industry and threaten to take everything you built. Today, we're breaking down the truth behind Marlo Mike, Boosie Badazz, and the situation that's reportedly got Boosie shook like never before. Let's start where this story actually begins, not with a courtroom, but with a person. Before Michael Louding became a name in legal documents, before he became the man at the center of one of the most talked about cases in Southern rap history, he was a young man from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, navigating the same streets that produced Boosie Badazz himself. Known in those neighborhoods as Marlo Mike, he grew up where options felt narrow and danger felt constant. Baton Rouge in the mid-2000s was a city where poverty ran deep, gang activity had generational roots, and the line between making it out and getting swallowed up was razor thin. There was no industry waiting to absorb these young men, no safety net pulling them towards something safer. There was just the block, the people on it, and the rules that governed it. That was the world Marlo Mike came up in. He was never a rapper, never someone chasing the spotlight. He was a street figure, moving in the shadows of a world that was getting brighter fast because of one man whose star was rising out of the same environment, Torrance Hatch, the artist the world knows as Boosie Badazz. Here's where it gets real. The relationship between Boosie and Marlo Mike, as prosecutors laid it out, wasn't friendship in any traditional sense. It wasn't two neighborhood guys running together. According to the prosecution's case, the relationship was transactional in the most violent way imaginable. They alleged Boosie, by then one of the biggest names out of Baton Rouge with real money behind him, was paying Marlo Mike to handle situations permanently. Let that sink in. The allegation wasn't that Marlo Mike was just someone Boosie knew from the block. The allegation was that Marlo Mike was allegedly functioning as a paid hitman, that Boosie allegedly had the money and motive, and Marlo Mike allegedly had the trigger. Prosecutors argued this arrangement played out across multiple incidents. Not a partnership, not a crew, but a financial arrangement where one man allegedly gave the order and another allegedly carried it out. That's what prosecutors put in front of a Louisiana jury, and that's what made this case unlike almost anything the rap world had seen. To understand why these allegations carried so much weight, you have to understand who Boosie was at that moment. By the late 2000s, Boosie Badazz wasn't just a regional name. He'd built a catalog of music that was raw and deeply personal in a way few artists managed to sustain. His mixtapes were everywhere. His name carried real cultural momentum. His following wasn't built on radio play or marketing budgets, but on people genuinely connecting with lives they actually lived. His music wasn't the kind that kept the streets at a comfortable, profitable distance. It documented the streets from the inside, with a level of detail and honesty that only comes from someone living it, not just observing it. So when prosecutors started building a case alleging his street involvement went far beyond his lyrics, the collision between his public persona and those court documents sent a shockwave through the hip-hop world. People weren't just reading about a man facing serious charges. They were reading about the man whose music had been the soundtrack to their lives, sitting with the question of what happens when art and life collapse into each other. The case that became the centerpiece of the prosecution's theory involved the 2009 culling of a man named Terry Boyd. According to prosecutors, this wasn't random street violence. This was an alleged murder for HR, deliberate and calculated, that prosecutors argued Boosie had orchestrated and Marlo Mike had carried out. This was the cowling that built the first-degree murder charge against Boosie, a charge carrying the possibility of the death penalty in Louisiana. Think about that. We're not talking about a weapons charge or a drug charge. We're talking about Louisiana looking Torrance Hatch in the eye, prepared to pursue execution. And Marlo Mike was the linchpin of the case, because prosecutors alleged he physically committed the act behind the most serious charge Boosie would ever face. The timeline stretched across years. Boosie was indicted and sat in prison while the case moved through the system, while the music world watched and argued everywhere. But here's where it gets interesting, because the 2012 murder trial didn't end how prosecutors planned. After all the evidence and testimony of a high-stakes proceeding carrying the most severe consequences the legal system could impose, the jury came back not guilty. Boosie walked out acquitted on the most serious count against him. That doesn't mean he walked out of that era without consequences. Separate drug charges kept him incarcerated until 2014, and those years took a toll you can hear in his later music and see in every interview since. But the murder charge, the one that had the whole culture holding its breath, ended in an acquittal. That's the documented legal outcome, and no internet commentary changes what that jury decided. Marlo Mike's story ended very differently. While Boosie's jury returned not guilty, Michael Louding faced his own reckoning, and when it came hard. He was convicted in connection with Terry Boyd's killing, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Not a 10-year bid, not a 20-year stretch with early release. Life without parole. In Louisiana, that means exactly what it sounds like. You're going to prison and the state doesn't intend to ever let you out. No projected release date, no parole board to petition. The door closes and stays closed. That verdict became part of the permanent legal record of that chapter of Baton Rouge's history. For a while, it seemed like the end of the public conversation. Marlo Mike was inside with a life sentence, case closed, verdict in on both sides. Boosie was out by 2014, rebuilding his life and career, and the story started feeling like history. But here's where it gets real spicy, because history has a way of refusing to stay buried when the right person digs it back up. The person who did exactly that, who turned a settled story into something a whole new generation started paying attention to, was a man out of Fort Worth, Texas, named Charleston White. If you know Charleston White, you already know he operates at a volume most people aren't prepared for. He's not a rapper, not a journalist, not a lawyer, not an academic. What he is someone who built one of the most polarizing platforms in internet culture by saying out loud, on camera, things most people keep private. He's talked openly about his own past, his criminal history, the time he spent incarcerated as a young man, and how those experiences shaped his perspective on street culture, the rap industry, and the relationship between the two. That personal history is central to why a segment of the audience takes him seriously. He's not coming at these topics from a distance, but as someone who says he lived inside the same world he's now critiquing. Charleston White has gone at Boosie publicly and repeatedly, and his commentary has never been subtle. He's challenged Boosie's street credibility directly, questioned the narrative around what happened in those cases, and argued the public conversation doesn't capture the full picture of what he believes went down in Baton Rouge. Whether his beliefs are accurate, whether they're based on information beyond the public record, those are questions without clean answers. What's not a question is that his commentary generated reaction every time it dropped. Boosie responded publicly more than once. Fans took sides. Clips got shared across every platform. And with every round of that cycle, the story got another injection of energy that kept moving through the algorithm into conversations that had nothing to do with the original 2009 events. But here's the angle that has people talking right now. The part that touches directly on why Marlo Mike's name is suddenly back at the center of the conversation. Charleston White has been vocal about Marlo Mike specifically, and what he's pushing isn't just relitigating the past. He's openly fighting for Marlo Mike's freedom. He's made statements about wanting to see Marlo Mike come home, raised the question of whether the conviction was just, and positioned himself as someone unwilling to accept that a life sentence handed down years ago is necessarily the final word on what happens to Michael Louding. When you sit with what that means, when you think through the implications of a public figure with A real audience taking up that cause, you understand why this would land with force among people connected to those events. Think about what it would mean if that campaign gained real traction. If Marlo Mike's case were ever revisited in a serious legal context, if an appeal found purchase in the Louisiana court system, or some argument not yet made found the right judge at the right moment, if the sentence meant to be permanent turned out not to be. A man walking out of prison after a life sentence isn't just a man going home. He's a man with a complete account of everything he experienced, everything he allegedly did, and everything he allegedly was instructed to do and by whom. If he chose to tell that story publicly, today's media environment would make sure every word reached every corner of the internet within hours. Podcasts, live streams, documentaries, the infrastructure for that kind of revelation exists at a scale it never did when these events first happened. That reality, what a freed Marlo Mike could potentially say to a world full of cameras and audiences hungry for exactly this kind of story, is what changes the entire emotional weight of the situation for anyone whose name might come up. That's the dynamic underneath the panic narrative. Not a physical confrontation, not a street beef playing out in the present. The stakes people are discussing when they say Boosie is shook are informational. The stakes of a man who allegedly knew who ordered what. Potentially walking into a world where telling that story would be the most valuable thing he could offer. That's a different kind of threat than anything the streets send your way, because there's no way to prepare for it or control the outcome once it starts moving. For Boosie, the years since his 2014 release have been a complex public journey across interviews, music releases, and a string of controversies unrelated to his legal history. He came home to a fan base that had held him down while he was inside, people who kept his name alive and showed up for him. He released music, rebuilt his profile, and found himself at the center of debates from parenting to health. He became one of the most argued about figures in Southern hip-hop, not just because of his past, but because of who he continues to be. Candid, unfiltered, willing to say things that spark strong reactions. That version of Boosie, the post-incarceration figure who seems almost allergic to staying quiet, is the one most of his current audience knows. But the shadow of the 2009 to 2012 period never fully disappears, no matter how many new conversations pile on top of it. That shadow is structural. It's part of the foundation of his public biography in a way nothing he does going forward can fully displace. Charleston White understood that when he chose Marlo Mike as a focal point, because attaching that narrative to a public campaign guaranteed Boosie's name would stay locked to the most sensitive chapter of his past for every new audience. Every video about freeing Marlo Mike is also a video reminding people of everything alleged about Boosie. Every discussion of the conviction is also a discussion of the acquittal and of who the prosecution said gave the orders. The two stories can't be separated because the prosecution linked them in court, and Charleston White has kept that link visible years after the proceedings ended. What this story ultimately reflects, zoomed all the way out, is something bigger than any one biography or legal outcome. It reflects how street life and the music industry created conditions in places like Baton Rouge in the mid-2000s where the distance between making it and losing everything was almost non-existent. It reflects how legal systems handle cases sitting at the intersection of race, poverty, celebrity, and violence, satisfying some people's sense of justice while leaving others unconvinced. It reflects how internet culture has collapsed the distance between something that happened 15 years ago and something that feels like it's happening now. And it reflects how one person with a platform and a cause can keep a story alive indefinitely by feeding it new angles for fresh audiences to care about. While we're here, let's talk about something that rarely gets enough attention: the Baton Rouge music scene, and what it actually looked like coming up inside it during those years. Understanding that environment isn't just background, it's essential context for how a situation like this could even develop. Baton Rouge in the 2000s was producing music that should have gotten far more national attention than it received. The city had its own distinct sound, energy, and set of artists building real audiences without the major label infrastructure New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles took for granted. Boosie was the most visible of that generation, but he wasn't operating in isolation. He was part of a community navigating the same realities, trying to build something with music while staying. alive in an environment, genuinely dangerous for young black men in ways that went far beyond anything that could be packaged neatly into a press release or a radio interview. The challenge artists in that position have always faced is that the authenticity making the music connect is inseparable from the reality it documents. You can't be the most honest voice about a place without being inside it, and the lines between observer and participant aren't always clear. Boosie navigated that tension for years, and his music reflects both sides, the beauty and the cost, the loyalty and the consequences, the love and the violence woven together in ways that made it impossible to separate the art from the life. When the legal system came for him, it came for exactly that inseparability. For Marlo Mike, that same case landed differently. While Boosie walked out cleared of the most serious charge, Marlo Mike carried the full weight of the conviction. His life sentence wasn't handed down in the abstract. It came down in the specific context of what prosecutors established about his role in Terry Boyd's death. And whatever anyone thinks about the fairness of that outcome, the legal reality is he's been inside a Louisiana prison ever since. That's the reality Charleston White has been publicly pushing against. The reality that would have to change for any of the online speculation about Marlo Mike coming home to move from internet narrative into something with real stakes. So here's what I want to know. Where do you think this is actually heading? Is Charleston White's push for Marlo Mike's freedom going to turn into a real legal development? Or is this just a story the internet keeps resurrecting every few months? And if Marlo Mike ever walked out of that prison, what happens next? For him, for Boosie, for everyone tied up in this. I want to hear your take in the comments. And if these are the kinds of stories you want broken down properly, you already know where to find more. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next.